Okay. So again, we're going to talk about app ID. See if my little clicker will come back here real quick. All right, clicked off. Let's go there. Okay. So an application is going to be a specific program or some feature whose communication can be labeled, monitored, or controlled. In other words, we're going to build some kind of signature off the traffic that's going through there. So we've talked about it before. In a standard firewall, we just allow a given port. We allow the protocol, TCP, UDP, whatever it may be. And on port 80, and we would have web traffic, but we have no idea what kind of web traffic is going across it. So in this fashion, it has a bunch of signatures for applications, so we can determine the difference between Netflix traffic, Slack, Zoom, Google, and then Google itself also breaks out into Google Docs, Google Calendar, Gmail, etc. So in App ID, if you guys remember in your settings there, when you can download the latest App IDs, it's basically a giant database of a bunch of applications that have been identified because they have the ability to be labeled, monitored, or controlled. That's kind of a big piece right there on a question, maybe like quiz. All right. So how does that work? It's identified by an application signature, or it's identified by a known protocol decoder. It could be done by behavioral heuristics or identified as unknown traffic as it goes through there. So the traffic comes in, if it registers, great, it's going to go ahead and take whatever policy set up in our security or decryption policy. Remember, for now, we've just been saying all apps, right? Or all services, etc. Now we can start defining those individual ones. If that traffic comes in and it's SSL encrypted, we could also have a setting that tells it to decrypt that SSL, in which case we could then send it back through so we could decrypt the traffic. So most of this today is all done via SSL, right? And so we can't really tell what's going on there technically because all that traffic is encrypted. There's some things that we can still see by behavior heuristics, et cetera, as to what's going on. But in most cases in a business, we would probably want to decrypt the SSL traffic going through our network. Right? Again, it goes through the protocol, through behavior, and then back down. All right. Now, note that last part there where it says continue to monitor for the application shifts. And a lot of times an application will be peeled off as a general one and then more specific as it goes down. So as you start using it, it can detect which part of that application you may be utilizing. So traditional firewalls would have a firewall that would allow port 53. Anybody know what that is?
DNS.
There you go. DNS is typically on 53. Are we allowing TCP or UDP for DNS?
TCP, right? No, UDP.
UDP,
okay.
Right? So UDP usually comes in. That's what we do our DNS traffic on. If we look up fhsu.edu, we send a UDP port 53 packet out to whatever DNS server we have set, and that should allow that to come back. In a firewall, we will look for DNS traffic and we will make sure that it is said DNS traffic porting over port 53. Now, a lot of you guys, especially you guys in the cyber side, we could encrypt traffic over DNS, in this case, port 53 over UDP. And most firewalls, we got to leave that open, right? So for example, BitTorrent, we can make that look like it's going over port 53 through a firewall. We have to allow it. Otherwise, we won't end up having DNS requests go through the firewall. So in something like a Palo Alto, we would see BitTorrent come in there. It is not equal to the DNS traffic we would expect, even if it's on port 53, and therefore we could go ahead and block that traffic coming through. All right. Same way on zero-day malware, we could also take a look with our intrusion prevention on App ID and see, okay, wasn't a message there. We could block it just the same. We could come over here. A zero-day attack could come in. Does anybody know what the C2 is? I have failed you as cyber students. Okay. So C2 is going to be your command and control stuff. This is what they're setting up. So when somebody attacks you, they're setting up TAC going on your system, which then reports back to a server, right? And that server that it's reporting back to is your command and control system. That's usually referred to as C2. So that 0 day comes in, it would come through on BitTorrent, or in this case, DNS traffic, and it sends it back. And that's actually how they usually send it back, is over DNS style traffic. Here, we would again recognize that that 0 day C2 stuff is going through there, and we would go ahead and block it. A lot of times attackers will come into your network, again, knowing that DNS always has to be open in order for internet to work. So what they'll do is they'll take files in your computer and such, and then encode them to be in bit streams going across UDP 53. Your firewall just sees it as DNS traffic, everything keeps moving on. In the meantime, they've exfiltrated a whole lot of data out of the inside of the system. All right. Palo Alto type things with App ID would protect that kind of system. With, let's see, typical TCP, you have your what? Does anybody remember what this is called? You should know this from John's class.
Sliding.
Not quite sliding window.
It's just sign up for a session, basically.
What's that?
I mean, creating a session.
It is under TCP, and so it has a fancy name.
Is it a get and post request or something like that?
No, that would be on the TCP side, or that would be if you're doing HTTP type traffic, I should say. Yes, that's what they're showing here is a get and a post of HTTP traffic, but this particular thing has a name.
And a three-way handshake.
Three-way handshake. That's it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Can't fix, right? So yes, in TCP, we always have a three-way handshake, in which case we send a SYN packet out. That server sends a SYN packet back with an acknowledgement packet. And then we send an acknowledgement packet back to the server along with the request that we're actually looking for, right? So does everybody remember why TCP is sometimes better than UDP? Or what's the difference between the two?
Doesn't lose any package, or where UDP doesn't require the package to be transferred all the way.
Yeah. The analogy is usually the post office, right? Where TCP makes sure that you have a communication channel set up, UDP just blasts it. If it gets there, it gets there. If not, we'll just keep sending traffic, right? So a lot of times things like video or VoIP, things like that would go over UDP, because if we miss a frame in a video, it's not the end of the world. Where TCP, we're going to send almost twice the amount of traffic in order to make sure that it actually received the packet, everything got checksummed, et cetera, et cetera. But it does make sure that the packets came in, and they could what? Does anybody remember the other thing you guys learned back in networking? The beauty of TCP is those packets
they can be assembled in the same order that they were sent, or
Yes.
reassembled into the same order, so they're ordered.
Exactly. They can come in unordered, or they could come in different times, and they will be reassembled back in the correct order, where UDP would just get flooded on out there, right? So the reason that's all important, when we're dealing with the cyber side, we can actually do send packets out. You guys may have heard of Nmap and things like that when you're doing scans. That's what it's doing, is sending send packets to see if those servers are responding on those ports, right? Same way on the firewall, when you're sending a scan or you're doing a scan of a firewall, if you're allowing those send packets to go through, it's going to go ahead and show up there.
So does authentication happens in three-way handshake process?
No. In this case, all that does is handle communication at layer 4. Your authentication stuff would handle probably up in 6 or 7.
Application layer, yes.
Yep. Okay, so classifying labeling on TCP. So again, a client will send a SYN packet to a server. In the traffic log, it will show up as not applicable because it's not responding. If we do the three-way handshake and we get a SYN, ACK, we will show up as an incomplete traffic log. Does anybody know why? Because the three-way handshake did not fully complete or was followed by no data. In other words, we did the three-way handshake, but maybe we didn't send any data after that fact, right? Or that somewhere along the line, we never got the ACK packet. So in the traffic log, it will register as incomplete out here in the middle. And we'll see those as we go through the logs. Insufficient data is when just the data is sent and maybe it's not enough payload to identify. So it could be a small packet, it could be something in between. If it's a large zip file or something, we could actually register that as a zip file because we have enough packets to be able to identify what's going through. Otherwise, if we get something like an ACK data ACK, we may get an application out of it, or you're going to see something like unknown TCP or unknown peer-to-peer or P2P as it's going through the logs itself. Otherwise, it should be able to identify what's going through. All right. So if you guys look at your Wireshark kind of excerpt over here, you'll see the source and destination address, the source and destination port, and then the application data that's kind of coming in down here at the bottom. And it could be something like hello world, but it's obviously going to be this bit stream that goes through here. All right. When we first send that on UDP, if that data doesn't approach the server, we get a non-applicable. Anything else that we get is going to be coming in as either unknown UDP, P2P, or whatever the application is. The big difference here is we are missing what? Between this one and this one.
Any type of SYNAC.
Yeah, no three-way handshake, right? There's no verification that traffic or an established command is set up to go all the way through. All right, so application shifts. Network traffic can shift from one application to another during a session. For example, I go to google.com, I click on Gmail in the upper right. Now I'm actually part of the Gmail app, right? It'd be nice to know that I am at the Gmail app and not just regular Google traffic, right? Because then we could filter out, maybe we don't allow our employees to get to Gmail because we have everybody funneling through our Office, Microsoft Office, Outlook, etc. We don't want them having access to Gmail or any other mail service out there, right? And if they were, that's probably because they were using it for their own private use, which we're trying to keep off of our systems at the office. So in this case, we could see where they're doing some generic web browsing. It's going through. Then we hit the generic app base, something like Google, and then that eventually morphs into the chat. And if you guys remember, there was always chat in the lower left-hand side of Gmail. If people started typing in that, we could actually see that traffic separate. Again, because we might more than likely want to block that style of traffic coming through the firewall. On application dependencies, obviously you're going to have some subsets go through there, right? So for example, if I'm Joe and I'm trying to access login.microsoftonline.com, it's going over 443. That is requesting Office on Demand. However, the initial application is going to be SSL. And then after that, we can detect that we are using Microsoft Office 365 base. If I'm going further than that, it may shift from generic traffic like this, SSL web browsing, to where we are specifically outlining 365 base, Office on Demand, and SharePoint. All right. Notice those are two different rules. They're set up very similar to each other, but we would want to, over time, restrict this one down. We wouldn't want to just let generic SSL and web browsing traffic. We want to allow only the ones that we specify. So the beauty of that is we could come into those applications, take a look, note that Office 365 base requires or depends on having SSL or web browsing in there as well, right? So if we list those out or you try to commit something on the firewall and you don't have all the packages required for it, it's going to complain to you and say you need to at least have these packages installed because it's dependent upon them. And that's what this would look like. So if you try to commit and it doesn't work, it's going to come up and say base 365 requires SSL to be allowed, as well as base 65 requires web browsing to be allowed. So if you had some denies or something like that in there, the firewall's smart enough to know that, hey, you made some mistakes, or if you didn't list them. Implicit applications, this can be something like Facebook. So Facebook base implicitly allows web browsing and SSL with no need to add a rule for them, all right? So those guys have dependencies. These implicitly state that they are going to be used on the inside. So it automatically kicks them on and allows them. That the difference there is where you see depends on versus implicitly uses, right? And every application's different. It's all based off the signature that comes through. All right, so if we want to configure an application group, this is kind of handy. Like, for example, they have one here called social networking. We can then list all the applications that we want to either accept or deny, right? So we could set something up like Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And then from there, we can add in all the other groups that we want. We can do this under our application group. If you want to create your own filter in there, we can go ahead and do that as well. And then all of that kind of funnels up to your security policy, right? So applications go into your application group. Your application filters go into your application group. Groups get assigned up here, and then they're pushed up to the policy itself. Yes, you could do individual apps, but it's better if you have a known collection of apps that you're trying to block, that you create one block. The reason is it doesn't have to chunk through every single one of those. It's the way the firewall's laid out. If you use groups, it's better off if you have a collection of those particular services. Yeah.
Can you import like a pre-made group, is like a big pre-made group of like apps you can find online or?
Yes, and so that will fall under category, which is a different type of filtering. We might cover some of that, but yes, there is some pre-mades for that. So for example, this one down here is going to have applications, and then we can see the different tags that are down here at the bottom. So enterprise VoIP, web app, this is for the Adobe Connect Now base. And then we can see that we are allowing this tag on the filtering for allowing any kind of VoIP application to go through. Up here, you can see on the application side that we are doing our trusted applications. Again, in a business environment, this would be useful to us. We could then do a custom peer-to-peer apps that we would allow. For example, we might allow something like BitTorrent on certain occasions. As IT guys, when would you guys use BitTorrent?
Ubuntu download, like OS download?
Yep, Ubuntu is a good example when you guys are trying to pull ISO files, right? For doing deployment or large deployments. A lot of times they'll use peer-to-peer because the file structure is so big. They don't want to have to pay for all the outbound internet service, right? Because that's usually what you get charged on in the real world, is how much meg or gig or whatever's going outbound. Amazon's a great example. So if I set up an Amazon server, I don't necessarily get charged on the inbound, I get charged on the outbound traffic. So if I host a bunch of files, I'm going to get dinged for all that traffic. However, if I help set up a peer-to-peer torrent, now it's going to be pulling from everybody else, not just my system. Therefore, I'm not paying for as much bandwidth. So there are use cases for that. But what you would probably do is lock that down to the IT group. And so only the IT group would have access to those peer-to-peer. However, nobody else would have access to that, right? Application block page. By default, you're going to see, like if we try to go something, you'll see something like this. And that application is blocked. The application you're trying to use is blocked in accordance with company policy. Please contact the system administrator if you think it's an error. And then you have the user and the application there, right? That is the default one. We can actually override that and make it look whatever we want it to look like, right? And so in the lab this week, we'll do that. We'll actually go in and try to tweak that HTML and make it look the way we want it to. So when you go into the traffic log, again, you're going to see stuff like 443 come in there, and it's currently under allow trusted, but under the application base, we can see what they're actually doing and what it's being associated with. And the goal is to reduce the number of illegitimate or unknown applications allowed by the firewall, right? So at first we may allow it, but if we start seeing that traffic over and over, we would like to have a signature so we have a clue as to what's going on. If we don't, we may kill it. And then when we kill it, we can find out what service isn't working, and then we can go in and figure out why it's not being identified. Okay, so differentiating between known and unknown applications, we allow network traffic. It's identifiable by an app ID, something like FTP, SMTP, Facebook, etc. Or we could have an unidentifiable by app ID, in which case is it because HTTPS is detected? Yes. Then it's going to go under SSL traffic. And if it's not being HTTPS, no, it's HTTP, then it's going to be classified as web browsing. All right. On all of those, If it is not HTTPS or HTTP, then we're going to go ahead and register it as unknown TCP, UDP, or peer-to-peer, depending on this type of traffic that's coming through. And so you'll be able to see that in the traffic log. On those unknown ones, we can either create a custom application with a custom signature, and we can do that under objects, applications, and add. We could create an application override policy, or we could just straight block unknown on TCP, UDP, peer-to-peer in a security policy rule. That will probably end up blocking more traffic than you really intended to, but it's a great way to identify what's going on. Because if your firewall can't identify it, I guarantee somebody on your network can, because they can't get to the service. All right. Clear text applications on their standard ports are pretty easy to find. However, SSL encrypted applications on their secure ports can make it a little more difficult. So supported applications are going to be web browsing, SMTP, FTP, LDAP, POP3, IMAP, etc. You're going to see a bunch of them out there. On non-standard ports, this is where you're going to start to see things like MySQL, etc., where 3306 is what's used for it. However, most of your malicious traffic is going to be using those non-standard application ports, in which case you want some kind of rules like this set up here. So you're going to block any kind of SSH evasion, right? And what this will do is take anything from the user's net going to the internet. If it's SSH or SSH tunnel, we're going to deny it, right? And the idea is that somebody on your network isn't establishing an SSH tunnel outbound to a command and control center and then starting to traffic things across that because we can't see what it is. It's encrypted, right? So we just block all SSH outbound traffic for that case. Then we can allow RDP on this case here, and that allows anybody off the user's network going to the extranet to use RDP. Does anybody know what RDP is?
Remote desktop.
Yep, remote desktop protocol. Yep. Microsoft. And so that's usually what you would see on Windows desktops. You could also allow MySQL. Anybody know what MySQL is?
Base.
Database side.
Database.
Yep. Perfect. All right. On the SSL and decryption side of things, we can identify applications by decrypting that SSL traffic. So for example, somebody goes to HTTPS, www.facebook.com. We will decrypt that at the Palo Alto, in which case it will go out to Facebook, come back in as the web server, and we can detect anything going on in between there, right? And this is a whole section on decryption and how we do that. So the way most of them will do it is that SSL client, in this case, going to Twitter or whatever else, will send an outbound, and it's going to use the CN or the, does anybody know what that is? When we talk about certificates?
Common name.
Common name, yep. So the common name in a certificate, it will be something like, you know, google.com or Inc., or maybe it's usually the FQDN of whatever service you're trying to go to is sometimes used. And so it will mimic that in the certificate in order to go figure out where that traffic's going outbound. So if it's going to twitter.com, it will then try to identify it as Twitter traffic. If a single website uses multiple, this only works if a single website uses a unique IP address, right? If it's hitting a load balancer or something like that, it's not really going to work very well. It can also look at the SNI field within the TLS side of things. And this is great when multiple websites share the same IP address. This is probably what's going to happen with the load balancer out here. All right. So we have a bunch of standard security policies blocking ports. We want to migrate to app ID based ports. So to do that, we're going to do that with the purpose of reducing our attack surface and provide information about application usage. It also helps us get like, what are the top 10 things going across our network, where otherwise you're like, I don't know. You should probably know that if you guys are the network engineers. All right. And even more if you are the security side. So prevent evasion applications from running on non-standard ports and identify over-provisioned application-based rules. So what we will do is come down here at the bottom of your traffic or of your security policy side, and you'll see a policy optimizer option. And this will allow you to look at rules that have no app controls, and you can kind of go through here and see if there's a better way to do it. What's nice is it will give you information like how much traffic has gone across, what apps are allowed, in this case, any, and how many it's actually identified that met this rule, in this case, 3. And so that 3, when we click on it, will actually tell us, I've seen this type of traffic. Then we can go back and modify our rule to match that traffic, all right? So identify any kind of port-based policy rules, add an application-based rule above it in the firewall. Why would we do that?
So it runs that one first.
You got it, right? And then the order of rules, the first one found is what actually gets triggered. So we would always take our, open policy one here, right? We're always going to allow 80 and 443 traffic. All right, that one's here. The one above it, we're going to add specific applications that we want to allow. And the idea is the hit count will hit the first one and not the second one. Then we can go back and identify the traffic that's not matching whatever we said it was and get down to this last one. When that hit count starts to drop because it's no longer being hit because everything's based off what we identified, then we can eventually migrate and remove that port-based rule altogether. All right. It still allows traffic, but we're at least trying to identify the type of traffic going through it. This is kind of a standard migration phase type system or a calendar system you could use. So you could freeze within a week, you could migrate port-based policies to the PanOS software. You could cut over and test the migrated policy, monitor, resolve any user complaints. Things aren't coming in like they're supposed to. About a day later, log any kind of user application traffic. And within 30 days, you can move on to phase 2. Okay. These numbers, schedules, and stuff is usually on quizzes. So pay attention on that side. In phase 2, now we're going to come down here and use that policy optimizer, find the rules that don't have any app controls, and then we can go in there and see what is actually being triggered. Like I said, you can see this one has 10 identified. This one has 36 identified. We can really start to pull that in. Notice that this is the danger simulated traffic one. So we can really start to clean up our traffic as it's going through. If you click on compare, this would give you a chance to see at any point in time. So you could view which ones it would match going through there. Eventually, sometimes you'll get double rules in there where one will shadow another, and the firewall will tell you that as well, so you can clean them up. You can create a cloned rule. So when you're in here, it's going to create a new rule with those applications in there and automatically send it out. So this is kind of your golden tool for all firewall users is this policy optimizer. It really helps you make sure you're getting those rules the best they could possibly be. All right. And so when you clone that rule, it's obviously going to stick it up ahead. And that way we can manually configure what's going on and see the type of traffic coming through there. All right. If we find something that's over here and we want to start logging it, we could add this to the rule and it would automatically add whatever application we found here up to the rule. All right. We can replace any port-based rule with add to existing rule, so we can map that over to something else. And then we could also go through on match usage that would check this policy to see which one of these applications is going to be mapped against. And then here we can see where we have applications defined along with those services at the same time. We can prioritize any kind of rules that are passing more traffic. So for example, this egress outside has 11.7 gig of traffic in the last 30 days. We should probably make sure that all those apps are being identified through there. What's really nice is you can go days with no new apps. If you're starting to see 180, that means you probably identified all the apps for that one, or 30 days or 20 days, right? If we're seeing 0, then that means it's constantly finding new apps since the last time you clicked on this policy optimizer. So the bigger the number here, that means the more stable you are overall. Does that make sense? Because if you're not detecting new apps on that particular policy, you've identified everything you need for that one. All right. Now, after 60 days out, you're going to start looking at your hit count and you can reset those columns and seeing what gets hit there. And then your more generic rule down here, as long as this stays at 0, you know you've identified everything higher up, right? then at that point, you could go ahead and remove this catch-all rule and we can move forward from there. You can also just disable it at this point. Again, 60 days down, you can remove it all the way through. The idea is if you add a tag in there, which is what it's talking here, your tag rules must be removed later, and we can remove that as well. We don't want a bunch of extra policies coming up here or rules, because again, the more rules it has to go through, the slower the firewall is going to be in general, right? All right, so after 90 days, we can go ahead and delete that port-based rule if it has not matched any new traffic. The goal is to have at least 80% application-based rules with no inbound or outbound unknown applications. Internal type stuff is fine. And you would more likely see internal type traffic going through there. We don't necessarily need to filter it unless you need to split that up into multiple zones. So a good example of that on a network I work on, it's internal traffic between our servers and our outside facing stuff that we would have like in a DMZ. We may also have backup or storage. Those are all different networks or different zones. We would not necessarily want certain traffic to approach those. Or if we have contractors come in, we may not allow them to have access to our core servers, but they could get to the resources that they need, the general websites, stuff like that that's on the inside. If you have one flat inside network, there's no way to break up that kind of traffic. So you always want to kind of chop it up into things that make sense. That could usually be done by IP addressing, things like that, and then you assign those networks to different zones. All right, so that app ID is a database that comes from Palo Alto. To get the latest version, you get the applications and threats content update. That comes from the app ID engine through your policies and then kind of maximizes the protection. Same way with content ID, you can see that as it goes in through and filter it in. If app ID can't identify that traffic, then the content ID cannot actually inspect the traffic. By default, this kind of stuff is usually at least downloaded, but maybe installed manually. Kind of depends on what you want to do on your network. And the idea behind that is applications and threats are constantly changing. So applications may evolve and may have a new signature because they pushed an update. Now it's not getting recognized as Office traffic until it goes through and pushes the new signature. So sometimes when you get these updates, you have to go in and manually verify what they're changing in each update package, what is added, what is removed, and make sure it doesn't affect your rules. And you can actually see that in the system there as well. So for example, here, we can tell it to download every hour at 52 minutes past the hour. When we do that, we say the action in this case is to download and install, but we also have the option to disable any new apps that are in that content update. All right. And that helps prevent any issues that we may have. You can adjust these to where you can do no action, download it only, or download and install. You can set your reoccurrence period all over the place, as well as however many minutes past the hour. That way you're kind of staging it. So you may have system updates at 10 after the hour. You have application and threats updates at 52 after the hour. That way your firewall is not trying to suck down all these updates at once. It also gives you a little bit of break. If something goes bad, you know, look, we haven't hit this time of the day. We know when it should be pulling what updates coming through. On any of those package updates that do come through when it's downloaded, you can see this here where you have the ability to install it, review your policies or review your apps. You can also click on the release notes, or if you go to your support portal, you can also gain access to those release notes. If you click on review apps, it's going to tell you what changed. So what got added, what got removed. On your review policies, it's going to tell you which policies are being affected by this particular update. So you don't have to go chase and figure out what's in there. You can pull it right here and say, yep, this update, is it going to break this particular rule? All right. Anybody got any questions on App ID? So when you go and we do this lab on Thursday, feel free to play around. Like we're obviously going to block something like Facebook, and then we're going to go out and try to access Facebook, right? But really play around with those app IDs because that's where you start learning what kind of traffic's going through there. Even better, go have a rule that allows all web browsing and SSL traffic, right? then go browse around a couple times on a bunch of different resources, applications, see if the firewall can actually identify the traffic of what you're doing. So that's kind of it. You'll do a little bit of that in the lab, but I encourage you to go take that a little bit further, because then App ID really starts to make more sense, especially when it comes to the nested ones like Google Base, and then Gmail's a different thing, Calendar's a different thing. Anything service wise is very, very different. All right. Questions? See if I can get them up here. Too far.
Will it differentiate the difference between like an application running on your desktop versus like a web app? Are those two different things?
If so, like say I created a web app in Python class, right? It's not going to have a signature for that. It'll just know it as HTTP traffic or HTTPS. Yep. Now, if it's a big popular app and it gets out there and we can build a signature to it, then yes, it can. Now, you could do that on the inside, right? You can create your own signature to that application, and that way it gets identified. That way, if you're using internal apps that you actually want identified as that kind of traffic, you could do that. Yep. But by default, no, it's just going to show up as regular traffic. So which of the three methods does App ID use to identify network traffic? Signatures, protocol decoders, heuristics, URL category, or application filter match? And there's three of them.
Sure.
Uses signatures.
Assume URL.
We didn't talk about URL categories. It kind of came up when you asked, is there a package of them? That'll be on URL filtering is the way that works. So when I talked about categories earlier, that's actually categories of URLs, and URL filtering is a whole nother option that you can do.
Filter match and then B protocol decoders.
So
Yeah.
ABE, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty good to me. How would App ID label TCP traffic when the three-way handshake completes, but not enough data is sent to identify an application?
Is it incomplete? Or was it insufficient?
C. It's going to be B or C, right? Based off what we were talking about. And so it should be which one?
It's B.
I thought it was incomplete. Yeah.
Incomplete? Yep. Yes.
Yeah. That's incomplete.
Because it's having to do with the three-way handshake prompt. If it's just sending data at that point, then it would come in as insufficient data if it was just blasting data. True or false, when migration is done over another vendor's firewall to a Palo Alto firewall, a best practice is to always migrate the existing security policy.
I would say true.
Yeah,
And then
I'd
you
say
just
true.
adapt it over time, I guess.
it seems like kind of an opinion thing. I would say true, and then I would take like an entire week and tweak it from there.
I mean,
Okay.
unless you really want to start from ground zero.
What was your reason of saying false?
Just start from ground zero and work it out.
Okay, so they're all good thoughts, right? The reason yours is going to cause you as a nightmare as an administrator is because if you don't know what traffic's going through there and you're starting fresh, you're going to miss traffic and you're going to get a whole lot of support tickets, right? Yes, that's the idea, is that you would migrate over from another existing firewall because you know it works, right? It's currently running their day-to-day business. Therefore, you can move those policies over. Then, yes, over time, now you're going to go and try to start identifying those with a Palo Alto so that you can build better rules over that phase period, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. But you're not wrong. I'm you. I love doing it that way. However, I also have to deal with all the support tickets when I miss that particular protocol, or 3 months down the road, they're like, why is this not working anymore? And it turns out it was all of our backups. That's real life, and it does happen. So, all right, Let's see, true or false, if app ID cannot identify the traffic, content ID cannot inspect the traffic for malware.
True.
False.
Well, it can't look at the content if it doesn't know the app, right?
Correct. Yep. So if app ID can't identify the traffic, then content ID doesn't work. And that was off one of those prior slides. Back here, I don't remember which one it was, but it was off that one of those last slides. When an application and threats content update is performed, which is the earliest point you can review the impact of a new application signature on existing policies? After clicking check now, after download, after install, or after commit? Well, there's two of those you could probably eliminate right away, right? What two are those?
After commit is
Yeah, after commit and after install, right? It's a little too late if we already installed it and committed the changes, right? So it's either after clicking check now or after download.
I would assume check now.
Anybody remember? If I'm stalling, it probably wasn't that one. What's the other one? It's usually after you download it, right? You download it, then it comes and it changes on the screen to review policies, review apps. Then you can actually click on it. Beforehand, all you would see is the potential for release notes. So when you do the check now, you can then check release notes. But if you actually want to see how it affects on your system, it obviously has to download those to the system. Then it can do the checks against what matches in there. So let's see if I actually know any clue what I'm talking about. ABC. So in that case, it was not application filter match, it was heuristics. And that's why I was teetering on heuristics, because that we didn't use that word, but that is very similar to the word signatures when it comes to firewalls. It's what allows us to match that style of traffic. In Python, it would be like regex, right? It's that style of what we're trying to do. C on number 2, insufficient data. So this was my hiccup when you guys were saying incomplete data. Incomplete data just means no data was sent, right? I'm sorry, incomplete meant that no data was sent. We did the three-way handshake, but no data was sent. Insufficient data is when not enough data has been sent to actually identify the application. And that, we can scroll back, the other direction. There was a specific slide for that.
Slide 10.
So clear back that for. Yeah. Or did I pass it? Yeah, one right before that. There you go. So incomplete means that the handshake worked, but was not followed by any data, or the handshake itself was incomplete. And insufficient data means there wasn't enough payload to actually do the identification. All make sense? Clear as mud? All right, let's go back. As you'll notice, these are starting to get longer and longer. Okay, so true B. And now I got this zoomed in too far. When migration is done from another vendor's, that is true. When app ID cannot identify the traffic, that is true. And this is B after the download itself. Right? So the only ones that we really messed up on was the first two, and that was we cannot use an application filter match. It is based off heuristics. And because it's talking specifically about data not able to identify, those are the key words, that one matches insufficient data. If it said here that no data was sent, the handwave sheet completes, but no data was sent, that would end up being incomplete based off definition. I'm only saying that because that's how tricky they'll change the questions. They'll literally change this from not enough data to sent by an application to no data sent. That completely changes it up here to incomplete. All right. Anybody got any questions on application ID? Like I said, from here on out, all the features we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks. Just pull this up here on Blackboard. All of this stuff down here is what makes Palo Alto different from any other firewall. Up to this point, everything's pretty much the same. Your open senses are going to have zones, right? Your PF sense will have zones. Most firewalls now will have zone-based stuff and everything we've done so far. And they'll have policies, NAT policies, et cetera. But now we're actually getting into what you're paying thousands of dollars for. And that's the application database. That's the URL filtering that you're going to do, again, because of the categories that you have access to, the wildfire, stuff like that. And each one of these is an add-on that you have to pay for, except for like encrypted traffic and stuff like that, user identity, et cetera. All right. Anybody else got any questions? Cool. Stop the recording.